Well, we're excited you're with us at the Ransom Church. That's a commercial for our series, No Excuse, starting next week. We're going to look at a bunch of different excuses we make as believers for not inviting people, sharing our faith, any of those things. A lot of them which boil down to what we do and do not know about God. And so we're going to try to unpack some of those things over the next 4 weeks. So the card that should have been on every other seat, that's not for you to put on your refrigerator to remind yourself what the series is. That's for you to invite people. So now you have no excuse to not use that card correctly. So go invite somebody to church. But a couple things before we jump into the sermon. Just wanted to remind you that our Feeding South Dakota drive is going on all month long. There's been in the lobby of each campus. You can just drop your donation, your food donations in there. Earlier this year, because of as part of our Called Out initiative, we were able to give Feeding South Dakota $43,000, which equates to 160,000 meals that we got to provide, which is super exciting. Yeah. Our hope at the end of this month is we'll get to do kind of a next installment of that as part of Called Out. I don't know exactly the amount, but we'll be announcing that. But so just bring in your donations, drop them in, and those plus the gift that we'll make will get to go to Feeding South Dakota. I also, if you were paying attention to social media, you probably saw something go out last night about how we had a big announcement. I do have a big announcement. I get to announce to you right now in this place the starting date of West Campus. Yeah. So now I just want to, it could change. Let's just call that what it is. Life is life. But it's official enough that I'm going to say it out loud today, that the starting date of West Campus is September 9th. So that is right around the corner. If that's you, we'd love to have a talk. If you want to know more about West Campus, stop by the Info Hub, or here at Downtown Campus, stop by the West Campus booth, and we'd love to have a chat with you about that. So we're in the final week of our Fuzzy Math of Marriage series. This series we've been looking at the reality that most people think that marriage works like math, that it should play by certain rules, and it just doesn't. And so just as a little bit of a review, we talked about how in God's math, 1 + 1 = 1. He's trying to draw the two of you into one flesh and join you together that way. We talked about the commutative property of addition, which just talks about the priority of order. We talked about in marriage, you don't commute everything equally. It's got to be God, then spouse, then kids. There's a priority of order. And then we talked about the distributive property and the idea of the covenant in marriage, that marriage is about commitment, not convenience. You don't distribute yourself out to a bunch of different people and things. You give priority and attention to your spouse. Today, the final property we're looking at is the identity property of addition. This property of math is pretty straightforward. It says this: when you add 0 to anything, it stays the same. So to put it in a math formula, A plus 0 equals A. The idea there is 3 plus 0 equals 3. -6 plus 0 equals -6. It doesn't matter what number you use. If you add 0, you'll get the same thing you started with. Now, if you've been here through this series by now, you've caught on to the pattern. Marriage doesn't play by that rule. If you add 0 to your marriage over time, you know you're not going to get the same thing, right? Marriage takes commitment. It's an essential quality in this relationship. And in all relationships, whether it's friendship, whether it's financial agreement, a business contract, or your marriage, it takes effort and intentionality to maintain relationships. And even the youngest among us understand that. The question we're wrestling with is, how can you have a marathon marriage? How can you have a marriage that lasts long term? And anytime I can, I try to get marriage advice from little kids because it's amazing the insights that they have. For instance, Kristen, age 10, says, no person really decides before they grow up who they're going to marry. God decides it all way before, and you get to find out later who you're stuck with. So, Anita, age 8, says, it's better for girls to be single, but not for boys. Boys need someone to clean up after them. Alan, age 10. Alan needs a little work. Alan said, you got to find somebody who likes the same stuff. Like, if you like sports, she should like sports, and she should keep the chips and dip coming. Alan. Bro. Okay. Ricky, age 10, gives some good advice. He says, tell your wife that she looks pretty even if she looks like a truck. I don't... But this is my favorite. Jack, age 7, such confidence. He says, "It isn't always how you look. Look at me. I'm handsome like anything, and I haven't got anybody to marry me yet." So, way to go on the confidence, Jack. But it's not just younger people that make us laugh. I found a story about an elderly couple. They were celebrating their golden anniversary, 50 years of marriage. And the husband was deeply moved by the occasion, and he wanted to tell his wife how much he appreciated her. The problem is she was hard of hearing, and the party was quite loud. So here he is surrounded by family and friends, and he stands up to make a toast, and as loud as he can, he says, "My dear, after 50 years, I found you tried and true." And everybody, they clap, except for the wife. She was visibly upset, arms crossed. And she looked at him, she pointed her finger, and she said, "So let me tell you what, mister, after 50 years, I'm pretty sick of you too." Now, listen, we know that marriage is meant to last, okay? And we celebrate marital longevity. Now, not everybody's supposed to get married. We've been talking about that through this series. Singleness is what God has for some people. Marriage is what God has for others. One is actually not better than the other. We've elevated marriage. It's not elevated. They're just different. But if God calls you to marriage, he calls you to marital faithfulness and marital longevity. And so here's what I want to do. If you are in the room or if you're at South Campus, I want you to stand up right now if you're married. So married people, stand up. Or if you're widowed, if you were married and your spouse passed away. If your marriage if you've been married 5 years or more, stay standing. All right? Got some new marriages. If you married 10 years or more, stay standing. How about 15? 20? How about 30 years of marriage? How about 40 years of marriage? Anybody been married over 50 years? 50 years or more, stay standing. We got some. You can be seated. You can be seated. Can we celebrate? And listen, the people who have been married like a year deserve the same applause in our culture, right? Because we know marriage is supposed to last. And if you've been in a marriage and it didn't last, you understand the regret that goes with that. You understand, man, that was the goal. That was what we wanted. I think the problem in our culture is we know that marriage is supposed to last. We just don't know how to make that happen. We're really good at starting the relationship. The first glance, the first smile, the first time you meet. Many of you are in the dating scene right now. Some of you, thanks in part to the fact I had you raise your hand a couple weeks ago, and then you could spot each other. But so if you're welcome. But I've been married 17 years. The thought of dating scares me to death, And so for those of you who are in it, God bless you. But if dating goes well, it leads to engagement maybe leads to marriage. And marriage is this incredible picture all through Scripture of two becoming one flesh, side by side, hand in hand, navigating life through this chaotic world. We keep coming back to Ephesians 5:31. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, the two will become one flesh. We love that picture, We love romance. We cry at romantic movies. Some of us pretend we don't, but we do. We want happy endings. We want to find ours. And if you get to the point in your marriage where you're together and life is good, that's great. But eventually, every marriage has that moment where the movie ends and real life begins. Psychology today would say it doesn't take long, usually somewhere between 9 months and 4 years, and just married starts to change, starts to shift for so many from a celebration, a life celebration, to a life, it feels like a life sentence. And the sad reality is that too many marriages are falling apart, and the couples in the marriage don't even necessarily know why. But they're not hand in hand anymore. They're not side by side anymore. They're far from each other. They don't know how they got there. I think they got there by assuming marriage played by all the rules. Let me show you what I mean. Turn to Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5, if you're using one of our Bibles, will be on page 378. If you didn't bring a Bible, raise your hand. The ushers will bring you one. You can follow along. If you don't own a Bible, just keep this one. It's our gift to you. Proverbs 5, written by King Solomon, the wisest man to ever live. This is book of wisdom, gives great insight into a lot of life, but particularly marriage here. Look at what he says about relationships and marriage in Proverbs 5, verse 15 and 19. He says this, drink water from your own well. Share your love only with your wife. Why spill the water of your springs into the streets, having sex with just anyone? You should reserve it for yourselves. Never share it with strangers. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She's a loving deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts satisfy you always. Amen. And may you always be captivated. Hey, it's just scripture. And may you always be captivated by her love. Now, I fully understand this passage is at very least PG-13, okay? And yet the content here is incredibly solid. Solomon is making an appeal for faithfulness, particularly the longer that you're married. Without question, the key to a happy marriage is only drink water from your own well. Be faithful. But not only is this an appeal to be faithful, to not cheat, but in many marriages, couples aren't being unfaithful, but their intimacy fades over time. And so it's not that they're drinking from another well, they're not drinking from a well at all. As a result, their love is parched and withering. And it happens, and the reason it happens is because of life. Anybody notice like life is happening? Your marriage is not static. It is shifting. And the problem is people treat marriage like math. They assume what worked in the beginning will always work. And over time, you get busier and there's more things fighting for your time. And you start giving less and less and less effort to your marriage until eventually you're giving zero and expecting the same thing. When in reality, marriage takes more and more and more effort. And the longer that you're together, you can't add zero to your marriage and expect to get the same thing. It takes more effort, it takes more time, it takes more energy, and your marriage actually will go through seasons. And most of us are unaware of this, but a lot of couples, when they start to shift into the second season, instead of leaning in, they give up. In fact, half of marriages people in the U.S. just end. People just give up. That's the recent statistic. And they end up splitting up. People in their 20s are using the phrase starter marriage now. Kind of like you think about a starter home. You buy a starter home because it gets you versed in home ownership, but you don't actually plan on living there forever. That's how people are treating marriage, according to Kathleen Walden of Human Services Department at Arizona State University. Most people at the first sign of adversity, they just give up. When in reality, they're just shifting in seasons. Marriage has different seasons, and God's plan is that you could weather all of these seasons together. And most just simply give up too soon. So let's take a look at the seasons. The first season is the season of romance. The season of romance. This is where everything is ideal. Most every relationship starts off here, okay? Every dating relationship that leads to engagement, during the romantic season is when couples get married. They're focused on each other. They're focused on each other's, their feelings are strong. Their passion is unbridled. Nothing stands between them. They're idealistic. They put their partner on a pedestal. They tend to overlook each other's faults and shortcomings because they're just so enraptured with one another. And I won't talk about this season long because we get it. We long for it. Most of us want our marriage to stay there forever. What we don't realize is it can't. It's got to go on. And it doesn't matter, the length of the season might vary depending on the couple, but eventually all relationships move out of the romance season into the season of reality. The season of reality is where, because everything before was ideal, now you start thinking everything is an ordeal. Right? In this season, the blinders come off. You realize, I actually married like another human being. And they are not indeed perfect like I thought they were. And it turns out either am I, And the very things that attracted you to each other are now the things that kind of drive you a little nuts. And then you get into the schedule and the pattern and the routine and the rut. Things used to be exciting. Now they're no longer exciting. Reality has set in. Pastor and author Tony Campolo describes it this way. He said, I personally believe that most married couples inevitably come to a time where they wonder why they ever got married in the first place and think that it would be a relief to be, quote, free again. There comes that morning when the guy wakes up and looks across the bed to see his wife still asleep, her hair hanging down over her face and her mouth half open, and he asks, "How did I get into this?" Or perhaps she wakes up first to see her unshaven husband with, in some cases, no hair hanging down over his face, and she asks, "Is this what I'm stuck with for the rest of my life?" The fact is, our love fades. God's love is perfect. Ours, not so much. No matter how in love you are, no matter how in love you feel, eventually that love will have seasons where it starts to grow colder. And the tendency in marriage is to settle for this. I mean, let's face it. Life is jam-packed. You got kids, you got work, you got your activities, you got their activities, you got responsibilities. You know, when you're first married, every night is date night. 3 kids in, everything changes. Date night is like buying toothpaste at Target with no children, you know? You're like, "Oh, do you hear that? It's quiet. You remember that?" I remember. "Oh, this is great. What a good date night. Thanks." Everything changes. Intimacy used to be an automatic response. Now it's a planned activity. Yeah, Thursday night, you know? Like, and if you're not expecting, there's no anticipation. And the worst thing is we accept this fate. I'm not saying I don't want you to be content, but I have to believe that what I'm describing falls short of God's plan for marriage. And yet in marriage, we tend to find ourselves reaching a point where we go, this isn't too bad. And we just stop at not too bad. Marriage becomes like a business partnership, you know? But hey, it's not too bad. It's, you know, at best it's kind of fun sometimes. At worst, it's still tolerable. I don't think that's what God had in mind. I think God's plan for marriage is better than this. I think it's deeper and more intimate and more passionate. And yet too many of us, we become okay with okay. We're not overly motivated to rekindle things. I think that verse 18 of Proverbs 5 is key. It says, "Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth." And the key is of your youth. Solomon is championing not just marital longevity, but the importance of keeping the fire burning like it was in the beginning. This is not just a call to stay with your spouse, it's a call to rejoice in your spouse. I think so many people spend a lifetime with one person, but it's not a lifetime of love and joy. Those of you who are married today, are you still satisfied in your spouse? And I want you to notice I chose my words carefully. I didn't say, are you satisfied with your spouse? Or are you satisfied by your spouse? Because this is not consumeristic. I said, are you satisfied in your spouse? This says that your spouse is to be a fountain of blessing for you. And even though that refers to the bearing of children in marriage, it's in no way limited to that. Your spouse is to be the sphere within which you find your pleasure and your joy. And that is to be equally true when you are young and beautiful and not busy and have no children, and when you are old and gray and tired. We are always to be captivated with each other. And for far too many couples, we lose this over time. It just fades away. This season of romance slips away. A season of reality sets in. We get delusioned. And instead of fighting for each other, we slip into the third season, which is the season of regret. The season of regret is when you tell a lie to yourself, "I want a new deal." You assume the new deal will fix things. What you don't understand is same problems, different face. Because they're humans. But you go, "I want a new deal." And the tests that come against our marriage are as numerous as the number of marriages. But there are some key motivating factors. It's when things like financial pressure, raising children, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, physical illness or injury. These pressures in life can challenge our vows to, love for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness or health. I think that's why those vows are in weddings. We wouldn't have to constantly remind people of this promise if it wasn't constantly coming under challenge. And far too many marriages, they're just not up to the challenge. They don't see their marriage as worth fighting for. In our first year of marriage, Stephanie and I, in our first year of marriage, this was us. More correctly, this was me. I will not do anything to defame my wife in public. I was selfish. I was arrogant. And we fought a lot. And I remember our worst moment. We had some terrible moments. We'd had some beautiful moments in that first year, but we had some terrible, like, throw down, gloves off, yelling and screaming, Parts of the first year were incredibly ugly, and I remember our worst moment very, very clearly. We're fighting in our living room, and she made some comment. I don't remember the comment. It probably wasn't that big of a deal, but for whatever reason, I was done. That, for me, was it. I was done, and I remember I looked at her with tears in my eyes, and I just begged her, please leave me. I begged her to divorce me. And then I grabbed my keys, and I walked out, and I got in my car, and I drove away. I didn't know where I was going. We lived in North Carolina at the time. I knew nobody. I had nobody close to me. So I did the only thing I could do. I drove about 20 miles, and I turned around and I went home. I had nowhere else to go. And I didn't leave her. But in that season, I didn't love her like I should. I'm glad to say right now she is my treasure. But that wasn't true then, and maybe that's where you find yourself. That's where a lot of people get stuck. If you find yourself here, you probably already know you only have 3 choices. Option 1 is you quit. And I know that seems like the easy way out. And if you get to the point where you're like, this just isn't worth it anymore, you're almost there, And this is honestly what most couples do. The average length of marriage in the United States is 7.2 years. It's easier to get out of a marriage today than it is to get out of your gym membership. I'm serious. It takes 2 to get in, 1 to get out, And some of you here, you're in a situation where your marriage is falling apart, and you're on the side of the one who wants to keep fighting, but your spouse has made the choice for you. If that's you, my heart is breaking for you. And if you're the spouse on the other side, please hear me. I know it seems easiest to just give up, but it will complicate the rest of your life. Which is why some people choose option number 2, which we've been talking about earlier. They settle. They just figure this is how it is. There's not much you can do about it. You've just decided to coexist. Everything's cooled off. There's no, I heard a quote from Minnie Pearl once. She said, getting married is a lot like getting into a tub of hot water. After you get used to it, it ain't so hot. And that's how a lot of people, they get to that point. They're like, well, I guess it's just supposed to be this way. Some of them are just coexisting. Some marriages, they're in a cold war. They're not talking to each other at all. Some are actually lobbing grenades over the wall. But whatever the situation, there's been this unspoken or maybe spoken agreement. We're not quitting. I don't love you anymore, but it is what it is. So this is just where we're at. And we're just going to coexist. And that is so short of God's plan for your marriage. Which is why I would beg you, if you're struggling, to consider option 3, which is rebuild. And I know what you're thinking. You got to be kidding. Have you met my spouse? Do you know how difficult my marriage has been? No, I don't. Not even a little bit. But what I do know is that despite those difficulties, if the 2 of you decide together to fight, it is possible to rebuild your marriage. And I'm actually convinced that everyone in here, you want a successful marriage. You just don't believe there's hope anymore when there is. By far the best option is do not quit, do not settle, but fight to rebuild what you had at first. I don't care what tool you use. Find a mentor couple, read a book, go to a conference, find a marriage counselor in town. Just fight. And if you do this, it can lead to the 4th season of marriage, which I can tell you from personal experience is the best season of marriage. Season of marriage I'm living in right now. It's better than romance. It includes romance, but it's way better than romance. The 4th season is the season of renewal. And I got to tell you, that season, this is the real deal. This is the real deal. This is what Solomon means in Proverbs 5:19, where he says, may you always be captivated by her love. In this season, as you go through these tough times and you fight for each other, in this season, your vows that you made on your marriage, they come to life. The promises you made on the day you got married get put to test. They get lived out in real time. It's a season filled with putting your faith in one another. It's a season filled with forgiving each other's faults and mistakes. It's rich, it's deep, it's messy, but more importantly, it's just so real. It takes intentionality, it takes trust and courage, but at the end of the day, it's way more than romance, because in romance, you're attracted to each other, but in renewal, you're choosing each other. Every single day. It is not for the faint of heart, but neither is marriage. Now, the reality is that rekindling a marriage doesn't come without risk. You have to be realistic about your marriage. The truth is you married a sinner, and so did your spouse. Every marriage is going to have difficult times. Every one of us is going to blow it. Every marriage is going to have drift. The question is, will you push through? Will you fight? Now, we're going to turn it over to the campus pastors to wrap up and turn us towards baptism, but let me leave you with this last thought in this series. You must admit this battle is spiritual. This is what I don't think people understand. The battle raging against marriages is at its core a spiritual battle. Marriage is a God-ordained institution, and that makes it sacred. And the enemy wants to destroy anything sacred. And it doesn't matter whether you're a believer or not. It doesn't matter whether you signed up for it or not. If you stood before God and man, you pledged your life to another person in marriage, the day you got marriage, you entered a sacred institution and you became a target. And if you're approaching all of the problems in your marriage and you're seeing the passion drain away from your marriage and you're just chalking it up to human stuff and the way things are, but you're ignoring spiritual implications, you're an easy target.